Here, man. We're gonna start. With Thursday's game. You got a divisional affair here. TC. I don't know if there's any trend or anything to be aware of, but Washington heads to New York. Giants 0-2. Washington bounced back with a solid victory last week. You got the Giants laying 4. No movement on the side. Total getting bet down though. 45 down to 43.5. I would imagine that has something to do with not only the short week but the divisional affair here early in the season. What's your take here, TC?
Yeah, and then that's your trend, Andrew. Your trend for the Thursday night divisional games that they tend to go under the total. Since we've seen the NFL Thursday night football on a weekly basis, the divisional games in particular have been of a lower scoring variety. Wasn't the case last week when KC faced off against Denver, but if you watch the game, there wasn't a whole lot of offense compared to how much scoring there was in that contest. So I'm not surprised at all that we've seen money come in on the under here, and that also has to do with the fact that the Redskins defense. Let's give them credit. They've looked good 2 weeks in a row now. And Washington offensively is really looking to keep the game on the ground. They had success controlling the line of scrimmage against St. Louis, which was something that was impressive from an offensive line standpoint. But the Giants certainly aren't looking to push the pace. The Redskins aren't looking to push the pace. So you can understand why we've seen under money for this one. The look-ahead line here was Giants minus 5.5. My powering number has the Giants minus only 3. Washington was a team that I believe my preseason power rating had the Redskins ranked 32nd out of 32 NFL teams. That was a bad preseason power rating. Washington, to me, has been as impressive as any, in terms of a power rating adjustment. I've upgraded the Redskins fairly significantly. I'm not talking about Washington being priced as an elite team or necessarily even a playoff team, but they're not a dead team. And the markets, however, will continue to support the 0-2 teams coming home. We're going to talk about that theme throughout the course of this podcast, Andrew. But the G-Man has 4-point chalk here, even though the look ahead was 5.5. You can make a power rating argument like I did that the number here should be even lower. But we're not going to see Redskins money in this one. The leading indicator book's pointing slightly towards the G-Man.
Is there anything to 0-2, or is it 0-3 or 0-4 that he covers?
0-2 teams at home. 0-2 teams at home, 1-3 teams at home. Those are two teams that markets will always, I shouldn't say always, but those are two types of scenarios where the markets really tend to support the team with the losing record.
All right, over to Sunday. Pittsburgh bounces back, takes advantage of an absolutely horrific spot there for San Francisco. Now they head to St. Louis. St. Louis, we just talked about Washington. St. Louis loses to Washington following that win against Seattle. You got Pittsburgh a 1-point favorite, 48 the total.
And here's a fairly significant move based on the look headlines. Again, the look headlines I'm quoting were bettable lines from the Westgate Superbook last week. So when we talk about some of the big adjustments, you can see how much one game actually affects these bettable numbers. And, for some of them last week, you look at some of the bigger moves last week. The Colts were 9.5 in the look-ahead line. They closed 6 in a lot of places against the Jets last night. Obviously, the money was right for the purposes of that ball game. But you look at some of the other ones where, let's say, Cleveland was a 4-point chalk over Tennessee on the look-aheads. And at various times last week, they were underdogs in that game. And, of course, the Browns were the right side against the Titans. So it's a bit of hit or miss when you're talking about, do you want to overreact or underreact to the market's perceived overreactions? But in this one, St. Louis was 2.5-point favorite last week. My power rating number is Pittsburgh minus 2. I've been a little bit below the market on St. Louis so far this year, and that didn't change following their, spotty showing at Washington last week. But, a big surprise for me in that game was the Redskins' ability to control the line of scrimmage against that powerful St. Louis front four. But, of course, Pittsburgh playing without Pouncey, they didn't have a whole lot of problems controlling the line of scrimmage against San Fran's powerful defensive line. And I'll tell you what, when you talk about explosive downfield passing games, I watched the Steelers 49ers pretty closely, and I don't know there are going to be a whole lot of defenses that are going to shut down Pittsburgh right now. That their ability to stretch the field vertically is probably second to none in the NFL, which makes them a danger to take care of business and to take money against St. Louis. I would expect to see Pittsburgh money here. Some of the leading indicator shops are saying that the Steelers are likely to get bet. It's 1 right now. That number can only go up. I don't see it going in the other direction.
San Diego on the road for a second straight week. They lose at Cincinnati. Minnesota bounces back. A dreadful performance in week one. They get the job done. A divisional game last week against the Lions. They're getting some play here, up to 2.5 here. Teddy covers after an opener of 144.5 the total.
Look headline here was Vikings -3. My powering number has Vikings -1.5. I don't think there's anything bad to say about what San Diego did last week at Cincinnati. They had a couple of breaks go against them, and of course they missed the all-important 2-point conversion, which remains the single most important point spread play in football, and thus Charger backers didn't get the money. But that's another game that I watched fairly closely on Sunday, and there wasn't anything about San Diego that drew a red flag for me. But the market's responding to the Vikings win and cover against Detroit last week, because it was kind of like a San Francisco-Pittsburgh spot, where you knew that the money had to come on Pittsburgh because the spot was so bad for San Fran. The markets were viewing the spot as being a very bad one for Minnesota last week. Coming off a short week, they played the late game on Monday night. They had to travel home with less time to prepare, facing a divisional rival, coming off a loss. And the fact that Minnesota was able to control that game and dominate that game has certainly given them a bit of market respect that perhaps they didn't have last week at this time.
Tampa Bay, they get the upset win, whatever you want to call it. We talked last week about them catching doubles against a fairly, mediocre, maybe an overstatement, Teddy covers. They head to Houston 0-2. This one opened 6.5, 7, somewhere in that range. That's the current market. Some opinion on this one, 40.5 the total.
Look ahead line was 8.5 for the Texans. My powering number is 7. Clients and I cashed a winner with Tampa Bay this past week. Again, that was a nice no sweat wire-to-wire job from the Bucs, but it was pretty strong bet against New Orleans in that price range, more than it was a bet on Tampa Bay. Tampa's going to be a team that is going to have their fair share of miscues. Houston less than 4 yards per play against Carolina. Ryan Mallett's first start this season with the Texans, and what does he throw? 58 passes. There's a potential that Arian Foster could return this week, and this is one instance where the return of a running back will affect the point spread and deserves to affect the point spread. They need him on the ground, given the weakness of their passing game right now, and Alfred Blue just isn't a substitute. So this is a line that has potential to move as the week progresses. As you mentioned, 7 in some spots, 6.5 in others. Right now, that number will move based on Foster's injury. Total sitting pretty comfortably and flat at 40.5.
Philadelphia, LOL, Teddy covers. They head to New York. Love to hear the look-ahead lines. I'd love to hear not only the look-ahead lines, but if you have offhand the number way back in the summer. Now we have the Jets, a 2.5 point favorite here, 47 the total.
I gotta grab that. I gotta grab my canner sheet.
That had to have been like 4 or 5, somewhere in that range.
It was 3.5 last week.
Okay. Well, it may have been higher, like 6.
The Jets. My powering number had the Jets -1. And I was a little bit disappointed this morning when the lines opened up, and all of a sudden here's Jets money, and now it's sitting 2.5. Look, Philly can't run the football. Philly hasn't been able to control the line of scrimmage, and Sam Bradford. Bradford was awful last week. Let's be real. They're counting on him to win games. And Bradford, of course, bet on himself. He declined to sign a contract extension, said he wanted to play out the season and try to make his money that way. Performances like we saw last week against Dallas aren't likely to get Sam Bradford the contract extension that he so covets. But, of course, Jets off a short week, and the 0-2 teams are going to take some money at some point, I would think. That being said, all the early money has been towards New York. And, this is not a mature line yet. Just got posted this morning. But this is one that's interesting to watch. At 3, I think there will be movement towards the Eagles. The line just can't get that high on the Jets.
New Orleans 0-2 heads to Carolina 2-0. You got a couple of lines on this one. We don't know the status of Drew Brees, whose shoulder is currently being held together with a couple pieces of twine, Teddy covers. But of those numbers, you got Carolina 3 with the juice, 45 the total.
Yeah, and of course, when we talk about the Saints and the potential here for a Drew Brees injury, the backup behind Brees, we got the Luke McCown and the Garrett Grayson as the second and third stringer. McCown would certainly, the veteran, get the start here if Brees can't go. But most books don't have a number up here for New Orleans. Look ahead line was Carolina -2.5. My power rating number, and by the way, this is with a healthy breeze. My power rating number is Carolina 6.5. Over
that high?
Look, I got the Saints ranked as a bottom quartile team right now.
Yeah,
and the markets aren't there yet. And when I saw them laying 10 last week, I'm like, this is ridiculous. They can't lay 10. There's a lot of reputation being priced in New Orleans. Like, oh, Sean, they'll be fine. And of course, here's the 0-2 team. Now the desperation is going to be priced in as well. Saints are a one-way team for me. You either bet against them or you don't play the game.
Patriots 13.5. They play host to Jacksonville. 47 the total.
So if you're doing power ratings right now, you're probably going to put New England 1. You can make an argument whether Jacksonville's 32 or 31 or 30, but they're certainly bottom 3. You can make an argument if you want to put someone ahead of New England, you probably can, but they're certainly top 3. So we're talking about one of the very best versus one of the very worst in the NFL, and this is the NFL in 2015. The worst team on the road at the best team, less than 2 touchdown point spread. Because the elite teams aren't that elite, certainly not early in the season, not a one of them. Every top team has a flaw. We saw some of that from New England's defense in the fourth quarter again last week after they got gashed by Pittsburgh in week 1. And of course, when we talk about the bottom feeders, it was a weekend, and I didn't see the numbers. I would love for, this is one of those deals where if I had a lot of time, I'd, be doing database research. But when was the last time the Jags, the Redskins, the Bucks, and the Browns all won on the same Sunday? It's been a while, but Jacksonville coming off their best performance, their first September victory under Gus Bradley. Don't know if we like this team off of back-to-back wins. 13.5 here. Look ahead line was 12.5. My power rating number is right here at 13.5. But if you're going to project which way this number is going to go, we're not going to see Jacksonville money coming off a win. We can only see Patriots money, so it's not going to hurt you to lock in on New England at the current number.
Cincinnati and Baltimore, we've talked. I talked with you. I talked with Aaron in terms of the power rating, at least what odds makers of the market, and it seemed to be heading into the season that for whatever reason Baltimore was power rated ahead of Cincinnati. All you had to do was look at that line against for Baltimore, looking at the line against when they faced the Raiders last week. Now, granted, money came in on the Raiders. Baltimore ends up losing, and now it's almost as if Teddy covers these two teams have flip flopped in terms of power rates. With Baltimore only laying 2.5. There's a little bit of juice. Obviously, you got a desperation situation, divisional game, 0-2 at home in the lot. But and you pointed out, there's Cincinnati. Aaron feels that Cincinnati's stronger than Baltimore, and that was prior to last week. I don't know where your power ratings came out, but 44.5. The total looks like the market has made a sizable correction here.
And that's funny you mentioned that. The look ahead line was Baltimore -3. So we didn't see any adjustment on the look, basically the half a point in some spots. And again, when I talk about my power rating numbers, I'm not putting any situational spots into my power rating numbers. When I do my power rating numbers each week, it's just for a hard math, team A, team B, home field. And I don't factor in the spots, but my power rating number is Cincy -1. Which tells you where I think the value is in this ball game. But of course, the markets are going to respect the 0-2 team heading home, and Cincinnati continues to be a squad that bettors are lukewarm about. They don't like Andy Dalton in big games. They don't trust Andy Dalton in big games. And even though the Bengals, that team has a lot of offensive weapons. You look at their lineup compared to Baltimore's lineup on offense, you say, wow. Since the Ravens have no weapons. Their receiving corps is as weak as any in the NFL. Their offensive line's in shambles right now. And to make it even scarier for Baltimore, this is the first time since 1998 that they haven't had Ray Lewis or Ed Reed or Terrell Suggs in the lineup. One of those three has been on that defense for the last, 17 seasons, and of course with the Suggs injury, you talk about a leadership void. We'll give the Raiders some credit, but this is a Ravens defense that has some major concerns right now, and that's not the feeling I have about Cincinnati. So, but again, the market's going to respect the 0-2 team getting home. From a spot perspective, it's certainly a Ravens spot, a lot more than it is a Bengals spot.
Yeah, speaking of the Ravens, Oakland against Cincinnati, we're talking about one-game situations, but, 1 + 2 = 3, Teddy covers. Oakland's offense looked as bad as I've ever seen an offense in the NFL there in week 1 against Cincinnati. Last week, they looked like Baylor. It was a crazy game. It's one of those games where the ball gets rolling. You know what I'm saying? Where one team scores, the other team, and it just snowballs. And you see that from time to time. So you can't overreact to that. But, I think you can react to it somewhat. That why was Oakland not able to move the ball whatsoever against Cincinnati? They scored a couple points late. They did nothing for 3/4 of that game. And then against Baltimore, again, they rolling up and down the field. Well, Oakland heads to Cleveland here. Teddy covers. Cleveland gets the win last week. They're 3.5-point favorites, 42 the total.
Yeah, and one disappointing thing about the Skype malfunctioning on Monday, we couldn't get our normal line report out on Monday like we usually do. This was my emergency betting alert because that line couldn't hold. Cleveland minus 4.5 at the open, and now it's down to 3.5. I was convinced we were going to see Raiders money. Oakland did enough last weekend to attract some attention from the betting markets, and the combination of Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree. Between them, about 260 receiving yards. And Carr had time to throw the football to that duo. Cleveland was able to get pressure on Marcus Mariota last week, force him into mistakes. And again, Johnny Football had 2 highlight reel throws. One his first throw of the game and one his last throw of the game. In between that, he had 13 pass attempts for like 40 yards or something. So it's still spotty. But of course, it is a West Coast team traveling east. The markets don't necessarily love that, but I know the markets don't love Cleveland as a favorite. Look-ahead line was the Browns minus 4.5. My power rating number has the Browns minus 3.
Colts, DEFCON 2 here, Teddy covers. They head to Tennessee. Tennessee back down to earth, but major issues, particularly in the offensive line there for the Colts. This one opened 5.5, 4 at Pinnacle, now 3.5 here, Teddy covers. Another divisional game, 45 the total.
Well, that's what made my decision to go with the Jets yesterday so easy because Indy's got the 2 places where you can have impact injuries that really aren't reflected appropriately in the point spread. It's in the trenches, and the Colts offensive line, and they're starting 2 rookies, they're a banged up unit, and of course in the secondary where Indy was also minus a couple of starters last night, and Ryan Fitzpatrick was able to take advantage because the Jets have receivers this year that they haven't had in seasons past. And those are continuing areas of concern for Indianapolis as they go to Tennessee. Here's a stat that I ran into. They kind of floored me a little bit. Most turnovers in the NFL since the start of the 2014 season. Jay Cutler's number 2. He's got 26. Andrew Luck's number 1. He's turned the ball over more than any person in the NFL since the start of last season, 28 times. Of course, Cutler was hurt for a time last year. That made it. But when you're talking about Andrew Luck and Jay Cutler in the same breath, there's only so much Luck could do. You don't look at that Colts receiving core and go, wow, what a bunch of weapons Luck has around him. You don't look at that defense and say, wow, they're going to be dominating games. Indy was powered very highly coming into the season, in large part due to Luck and in large part due to their schedule. Not necessarily due to the personnel at hand. And obviously we've seen some personnel weakness from Indy through the first couple of weeks. Look ahead line, only Colts minus 4.5. My power rating number, however, is the Colts only minus 2 in this ballgame. I wouldn't be shocked. We've seen a heavy Tennessee money in early action today, but I wouldn't be surprised to see some Indy buyback between now and kickoff. I would be very shocked to see this line close. Colts minus 3.
Boy, I look at both teams, and you think Jake Locker was sitting on his couch laughing? Mariota almost got killed last week.
Yeah, it wasn't a pretty offensive line performance from Tennessee, but 45 is that total. Open as high as 48 at the Westgate, but that was an outlier line. 45 and a half, and yeah, it certainly to take a look at that under makes a lot of sense to investigate. Yeah.
Atlanta, they head to Dallas. No Tony Romo. Both teams 2-0. You got the Falcons a 1-point road favorite, total of 44.
So just to give you an idea of how the betting markets are viewing Dallas without Tony Romo and without Des Bryant, although Bryant's injury was expected last week, so the look headline had Bryant's injury factored in. By the way, they may not have Jason Witten in this game either. He's pretty banged up. But the look headline was Dallas minus 4.5. Now the number Atlanta minus 1. That's exactly where my power rating was. That was Falcons minus 1. So we're talking about a 5.5 point swing on Romo to Whedon. Is that warranted? I think so. Romo's an elite quarterback. Whedon is not.
Yeah.
That being said, Atlanta doesn't have a necessarily an elite defense. Both teams are 2-0. Dallas may be a little bit, you don't want to say satisfied, but back-to-back divisional victories to open the season. Meanwhile, Atlanta back-to-back come from behind wins in the fourth quarter to open the season. This game might be fun, but in terms of where the line is going to move, I don't know. I got no great sense on this one. Like I said, my powering number is right where the line is, and I wouldn't expect a whole lot of money. I'm not expecting this line to move dramatically one way or the other, I guess is what I'm saying.
Arizona, they can do no wrong. Teddy covers, laying 6.5, playing host to San Francisco. Divisional game, 44 the total.
Yeah, and we've actually seen a little bit of San Francisco money. This is going to be a sharp square divide game, I'll tell you that right now. I think Arizona may well be the number one public side this week. And San Francisco is going to attract wise guy attention because, of course, last week the no-show at Pittsburgh where they fell apart on both sides of the football. There's no shock in that. We knew how bad the spot was coming off a win on a short week, facing a team with extra rest. West Coast team traveling east for an early start game. It was the mother of all bad spots, and San Fran played like it. But the wise guys are going to look at that and say, hey, we can expect better from the 49ers this week. And here's Arizona that may be a little bit overvalued at this stage after facing a Chicago team knocking out their quarterback and taking advantage of a bad Bears defense. 49ers defense is certainly better than what we saw last week. But on the other hand, Arizona's downfield passing game is downright scary, and there's teams you want to step. There's teams I want to step in front of, and teams I don't. And Arizona's a team I have no interest in stepping in front of. The markets have underrated the Cardinals consistently throughout the Bruce Arians tenure, and that hasn't been any different this year. Look ahead line for this game was Arizona minus 4.5. My powering number, right where the current market is, at 6.5.
Bears, Jimmy Clausen, they head to Seattle. Both teams 0-2. You got the Seahawks laying 14.5, 15, 44.5 the total.
And again, we can get a very clear idea of what the markets think of the drop-off between Jay Cutler and Jimmy Clausen. And Clausen was not good in relief of Cutler last week, not even a little bit. A look-ahead line here, Seattle minus 9.5. Current number minus 14.5, minus 15. There's even a 16 out there on the Seahawks. So the markets are not looking at the Seahawks and saying, hey, this team's coming back to earth. This team's not as good as they've been. They're looking at the Seahawks as an elite 0-2 team coming home in week 3 against an opponent with a backup quarterback and no defense, which is certainly reasonable to do. But my powering number, and again, this comes with the Cutler to Clausen adjustment. I didn't make a huge adjustment there, but I did make an adjustment. Came less than 2 touchdowns. I came 13 on this ball game. So from a value perspective, I continue to think that the Seahawks are an overrated commodity. Cashed a big ticket against them this past week, and I'm not looking to lay the price with Seattle here. But of course, a team that went and played their first 2 games on the road, now they come home. This is a strong home field, and the Bears' defense is as weak as it gets. I wouldn't be surprised to see this total getting bet up. The early money's been on the under. 45 down to 44.5 or even 44, but that might change throughout the course of the week.
Buffalo, Miami, good matchup here. AFC East, you got Miami laying 3, couple of 2.5s, 44 the total.
Look ahead line was Dolphins minus 3. My powering number has Dolphins minus only 1.5. We're looking at 2.5 with heavy juice or 3s in this ball game. The markets are going to respect Miami at home. They like the Florida home teams in September. They think that you're playing in Buffalo and you go down to the heat and humidity of Miami, and it affects you. That being said, you want to look at some long-term trends and angles. Boy, you don't want to be laying points with teams the week before they go to London. Since 2012, there's been one favorite that's covered the week before they go to London. It's been a really bad subset. Miami, of course, traveling to London next week. And, of course, the Bills coming off an embarrassing loss. I think even more embarrassing than Miami's loss to Jacksonville, considering the trash talk they had against New England heading into that game. Redemption game for both teams, but Buffalo, we've at least seen one good game out of this year. Miami, they've been all hype and no production, a team that looked very good in the preseason. Like Philadelphia, that hasn't looked very good here in the regular season. But the markets continue to give the Dolphins a fair measure of respect. But if I'm playing here, I can only look at the Buffalo side.
What does going to London mean?
They're playing a game in London next week.
Yeah, it just seems random. What do they look ahead or
apparently
overlook?
Sure. Cause after the game, they take off. They're flying out.
That doesn't mean anything.
It's just static. It might be. I'll tell you this. If you look at recent results, the favorites in particular, but favorites and dogs both, the week before teams go to London, they have played poorly, and it's been fairly consistent for the last 3 years. So.
Yeah, I would think the actual game in London or the game after London would be, where you want to look.
Well, they give them the bye week after London.
Okay, well, then that's nullified. That makes sense.
Yeah, you don't have the after London game anymore.
Okay. Last game Sunday night football. Denver heads to Detroit. No line on this one. Teddy covers as Matthew Stafford currently questionable with some banged up ribs.
Yeah, look ahead line was the Lions pick 'em. My powering number has Denver -2. That's with Stafford in the fold. So I'm seeing here a 2.5 opener from the Westgate. I think that may be a mistake. I had a pick 'em right there, and I wrote it down, and I'm sure I'm right because I tend to be accurate with these sort of things. So, bottom line is Broncos not a team that the markets are very excited about, even though Denver did play well when Peyton Manning went back to the shotgun in the 2-minute drill against KC on Monday night. Very interesting to see if the Broncos, because Kubiak wanted Manning behind center. The offense hasn't worked with Manning behind center. The best drive of the year by far for Denver came on that 2-minute drill where they were running no huddle and Manning out of the shotgun. It'd be very interesting to see what Denver does in that regard in this ballgame.
Monday night football, Kansas City. Someone asked me on Twitter, Teddy Covers, where, teams off of 4 turnovers or more in a game, the following game, I didn't see anything there. Not that, I just out of curiosity, and that kind of makes sense. Typically, from an ATS perspective, there was nothing. From a straight-up perspective, it was well below 500, but teams that turn the ball over that much are typically not very good football teams. So, nevertheless, boatload of turnovers for KC. Now they head to Green Bay. You got Green Bay 6.5, 7 at a couple of shops, 48 the total.
Yeah, can't love the spot here for the Packers. I know it's a home game on Monday Night Football, and you're supposed to be in love with those kind of spots, but at the same time, Green Bay, divisional game in week 1, meaningful revenge game in week 2. Now they got a non-conference game. The markets are going to like the over in this contest. They like the over in these games between the non-conference affairs. The offense tends to have a bit more success. And at 48, I would anticipate this total getting bet up a little bit. Look ahead line was 6.5. My powering number is a little bit lower. I've got Green Bay only 5.5 in this ball game over KC. And I don't think there's any question the Chiefs are the better defense catching points. But of course, going up into and the public's going to fall in love with the Lambeau angle. You would think there might be some Green Bay money between now and Monday, but in terms of is this line desperate to move, it's not. But if you like the Packers, locking in at 6.5 is not going to hurt you.
Good stuff, TC. What do you got rolling?